Good morning, everyone. This is going to be my subject for today. Not actually the bear, but we're going to be talking about painting fur. So this was actually one of the requests that I had in a previous demo. And if you're new here, I am Shelley Pryor. I am a realistic watercolorist from Ontario, Canada. And every Wednesday morning at this time, I will be offering a free live demo. So thank you for joining, and let's talk about this fur. Let's move on over here. Okay, so this is my reference picture. I guess you might call this my fur niece, but she's such a pretty little thing, and she really shows the various types of texture that I wanted to demonstrate today. So first of all, I want your understanding of fur to be first. Okay, so let's take a look at my bear here. Okay, so we're looking at this bear. And when you're looking at the bear, you can see the actual hairs coming in these long directions. Now here's the mistake that most people make. They will put long hairs in here. But look, these are going straight up and down, just like my pencil. If I had my pencil going in the direction of the fur, here it's going straight up and down. So what's in here actually ends up looking pretty speckly instead of very long. So this is one of the things that actually help to create the feeling of contour, the roundness of your animal, the muscle structure, things like that. And it's less noticeable, of course, with short-haired creatures, but for animals with long hair, you definitely see this, right? Where some areas you're going to have longer, and these will be illustrated more with these longer lines where these are going to be more stippled. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me zoom out just a little bit. I'm in a little too close here. All right, so I'm going to be working on a sheet of Arches 140-pound cold pressed paper. This one is 11 by 15, so it's a quarter sheet, 11 by 15 inches, that is. And I'm going to just start off with drawing the main structures. One of the big holdups that you will find when you are painting fur, if you draw too much, your pencil lines are going to show, especially on a blonde animal such as this one. If you have a lot of pencil lines in there, they're all going to show through because you need to leave a lot of that white paper showing through in order to make that look quite light. This watercolor will have to be quite light through there. So of course your pencil lines are going to show through. So I need to do my pencil lines as light as possible. So I'm just focusing more on the structure. And then as I'm painting, I'm going to be talking about and demonstrating how I create the directional fur and things like that. So I want to start off, I want to place my dog nose, okay, somewhat central. Usually a central composition doesn't make a good composition, but in this case we've got, this is an up-close personal approach to this, so we want to make sure that we have this really front and center. Sometimes that can be fine in your composition. So I want to place my nose, or her nose I should say, in this area here, and I want it to be, let's see, about this large. And it's kind of funny because a dog's nose is very different from a human nose. It sort of reminds me a little bit of an alien head. You might think I'm a little weird, but it does. So here are the nostrils, are the alien's eyes. Okay, there's the eyes and the nose. And then we have the little tiny face. So, you know, they have the big cranium, at least, you know, from the old movies, that's what the aliens always had. Martians, whatever you want to call them. All right, so we've got a basic structure for the nose. I can place the mouth central underneath there, so we've got something in this zone, but I'm not going to draw too much. Really not going to draw too much there. Now let's look for this shape here, right? It's almost like a big upside down triangle, but it does droop down a little bit here. So I'm looking for this angle. If I place my pencil on that angle, I know that it's approximately 45 degrees. And so I want to make sure that what I'm drawing is also 45 degrees. Would I ever use watercolor pencils to make the drawings so that you don't get the dark pencil marks? I know some artists who do that. I personally don't love using watercolor pencils, mainly because the pencil lines never completely go away, and it looks a little bit like I used colored pencil with my watercolor. That's not a bad thing. Tons of artists use multimedia, and that's perfectly fine. On the cold press, I do find that it kind of hits the bumps, so you never get a clean line or anything like that. I just prefer pencil. It's what I use all the time. It's not a wrong thing to use the watercolor pencils, but it's a good thought. And for those of you that aren't familiar with watercolor pencils, they dissolve in water just the way your watercolor does. So the other downside to that is sometimes when you are wetting things, you end up losing your pencil lines. So the one thing about the pencil is it will stay. It's hard to get the best of both worlds, right? Now you're going to always think alien heads when you see a dog's nose. But I'm going to just come up here and trying to get this general shape for this muzzle. You can sort of see this general triangular shape here, because that could come at a little bit more of an angle. And then we have the chin, which is a little bit round, flatter on the bottom. Okay. Now, here's my thinking process as I'm drawing this, because getting a good drawing to begin with, at least the basic structure, is absolutely paramount to having a successful painting. So if I take the edge of the nostril here and I draw a straight line up in my drawing, I can see that this eye lines up with that side of the nostril. And you might think, well, that's a good formula. I'm going to use that. But it all depends on how the angle of the dog's head or the animal's head. The other eye is not going to line up the same. So just depending on the slight angle of the head, that won't always be a formula that you can rely on. I'm just visually, I know where my nose is because I've drawn it. So now I'm going straight up from there, and this is the corner of the eye. So now the eye, I don't mind taking a little bit more time and putting more detail in the eye. I won't do it all right now, because what if it's in the wrong place? Or what if it's too large or something? So I'm not going to go drawing in a lot of detail at this point. But when I know that I have the basic shapes and structures in there, then I can revisit all these areas and put more detail in. So what about this eye on the right? So if I line up the nostril, you can see this eye is not in line. So I need to come over. This eye is also a little lower. look at the angle of those eyes. They aren't parallel, so I have to make sure that they are also following a little bit of an angle. If I were to go and draw this in the way that a lot of people draw human portraits, perhaps go up the middle of the nose, then you have maybe a little bit more equidistance between the nose, and I'm using that angle here, but you might have a little bit more equidistance, but again, it all depends on how turned the head is. So I'm just using these as landmarks, I guess, from which I can draw the next shape. Yeah, can't unsee that alien head. Oh, Shelley, are you using cold pressed? Yes, I am. It is cold press Arches paper, 140 pound. Others say they don't like to draw directly on the watercolor for fear of damaging the tooth of the paper. Do I see issues? Yes, if you are not strong in your drawing skills and you do a lot of erasing, I would not recommend doing your drawing directly on your watercolor paper, because then you're erasing a lot. That's what actually abrases the paper. So that's a great question, actually. And doing a lot of your drawing, you know, especially if it's very technical, I would draw that on maybe a piece of tracing paper or a separate piece of paper and then transfer it on. But I wanted to, if I took that time in my demo, there's no way, like it would just eat up a lot of time for me to transfer it afterwards. So I'm drawing directly and I'm explaining my process as I go along. All right, so this eye has to line up on a slight angle. That means like this. Try to get it the size approximately the same. This eye is going to be very much in shadow. Okay, so the rest of the head, we've got straight line here. Starts to angle. And I am drawing, I am using very little pressure. You know, in terms of the using a pencil directly on your paper, I'm using light pressure because I don't want to have a problem where I'm scoring into the paper with my sharp pencil or anything like that. So I am trying to use light pressure. I also don't want to lock in any of my lines too heavily until I'm sure about things. Have I got the right shape? Now we've got this ear over here, so I've got this very slight angle coming down here. That's that slight angle. Then we have this ear that comes down, and I'm looking at the curve. This is longer hair for sure. So we've got these longer curving hairs. You notice something that I'm doing? I'm using a lot of straight lines, which is really weird because it's such a round face, right? So the roundness of the face is sometimes easier to accomplish by first establishing the area in which it's going to fit. So I do that with straight lines, much like somebody who is carving a piece of wood would first take the chainsaw and they would take off big chunks and get it to the size, the general size of the area that they want to sculpt. Then they take out their finer tools and they start carving things away. So that's kind of how I think of drawing as well. So I'm getting pretty close here. I think I can just about get this general shape in here. This back, let's see, where's that line up? Right, pretty close to where the top of the eye is, just a little higher. Okay, so the back is here. Okay, then we have the arm of a chair here, so we're going to just bring this down on an angle, and this actually exits at on the bottom of the page. I think I have a little more space below the chin here, so mine's going to come over a little further. And on the other side, in this shape right here, right, it's very close to the top of the straight line that I did. Okay, so that's where that goes. And I'm looking at the angle. Is it 45 degrees or, you know, the angle of that, so that it actually lines up with the one down here as well. Okay, the rest of it, we don't really see any other dimensions. You know, there's a cushion on the chair, but I'm not going to put all that detail in there anyway, so I just, you know, that's all I really need to draw. I want to keep this all about the dog. So now I'm going to start breaking down other areas, smaller sections. So start with big shapes, then work your way down to small shapes. So in here we have a very dominant shadow area around this eye, you know, because it's inset. It's in behind the hairs. So let's see if I can get that shape in there. It comes down quite a bit below the eye. Okay, so this is this shadow area. And if you need a reminder, feel free to shade a little bit, even with your pencil. You're going to be putting dark color in there anyway. If you do it lightly, it's just a reminder for you that that's a shadow area. This can be very important when you are doing things that are complex. You know, you get a lot of lines on your drawing or something. Like when I'm painting crystal, for example, it's very hard to, you know, especially if you're tracing a drawing onto your paper, and you look and it just looks like 1,001 lines, and you don't know what's highlight and what's shadow. By just lightly penciling it in, then you're not at a point where you have paint on there and it's harder to remove. So you can look at it, take your eraser if you need to erase it, and do any corrections. So I'm just doing a little eye drawing here, and this basic shape. Let's shade that in so I don't forget. Okay, I've got that shape. I've got this little bit above the eye as well. And this one's a lighter one. This patch around the eye, it almost looks like a colored patch. It's just the way the lighting is. But there's an area here that is going to require a little bit more shadow. And you could do this just with your brush. You don't have to draw this in. If you think you can put it in with your brush, do it, because that's going to ensure that you're not going to see any pencil lines for sure. Okay, so we have a shadow area here. So now I'm thinking in terms of shape and shadow. So here, this block here, so I'm not even thinking, oh, muzzle, fur, or anything like that. I'm just looking at this general shape here. You see this shape right here in there? I want to get that basic shape in there so I know where that shadow is going to go. Chin, fur. Okay, so I can start to refine a little bit. I've got a little bit more shadow right here. And just a hint of the ear on the other side. It's not much, but there's a little hint of the other ear over here on the other side. Okay, so I have my general shape. I think I'm just about ready to start drawing here, or start painting, I should say. Okay, this part in here is a bit shadow too, so I'll just kind of hint at that. Okay, erase any unnecessary lines. So as you're constructing this and you are, putting a line down, it's not the right one, you might end up with multiple lines. So make sure you're erasing the unnecessary ones. You won't get confused as you're painting. Less likelihood of any of the pencil lines showing in your final painting, and so on. Okay, so why do so many artists have fur that looks like porcupine quills? It's because they're working on dry and they're trying to paint hairs. Don't paint hairs. Rusty's asking, hi Shelley from Newfoundland, how was Watercolor Live? Actually, day one is just starting, and we're kind of overlapping in our events, but I will get the replay and I'll be able to watch what I missed this morning. Likewise, there might be somebody there who's going to catch my replay of what I'm doing right now. But Watercolor Live, for those of you that don't know, is a online conference, a watercolor conference, and it is jam-packed with artists from all over who are well-known and will give you all kind, like just endless information for 3 straight days. It's a real marathon, but it is a lot of fun because you will learn so many different techniques from different artists, and sort of see inside of their studio and inside their mind. But imagine what it would cost you to attend workshops with each and every one of those artists. That would cost you a small fortune for sure. Anyway, that's what it is. Watercolorlive.com, spelled color, watercolor, spelled watercolor, COLOR, not the Canadian UK way. It's spelled the American way. So watercolorlive.com, you can check that out. I believe you can still sign up, but if you do, make sure you use the discount code PRIOR. You'll get 10% off. All right, so what kind of eraser am I using? I am using a Staedtler nylon eraser. It's nothing fancy. Most of the time I like to use a kneadable eraser. A kneadable eraser is less abrasive on your paper. I just didn't locate it this morning, so I am using this one. Good morning, Amy. So, all right, so let's keep going here. Let's, whoop. Okay, it's there. So I have my drawing. It's pretty rough. But I think the dimensions, like the proportions and things, are pretty close. I might change this line just a little bit. It looks like I've got more fur here than I need. So I'm just going to angle this just a little bit more, bring this a little closer. Light pencil means light erasing. Less abrasion on your paper. All right. So the big thing about softness is working on wet. So I'm going to start off by wetting my paper. I'm thinking through this process, okay? So I'm working on a light dog. Would it matter if any of this color got into the eyes? No. So I'm just going to paint. I'm going to wet it all. I don't really need to fuss with anything right now, but I want to get some of this really soft area up in here. Before I wet my paper, why don't I get my paint ready? So I'm going to start off. I need this. I need a variety. This is almost a lavender gray, perhaps. That's how it appears. It's probably picking up a lot of colors in the room. This one's definitely more of a burnt sienna vibe. A little bit more gray down in here, definitely darker. What else do I need? This one's a little bit more of a combination of that taupey color. This is kind of a taupe color. This one starts to get a little warmer over here and things like that. So I need to have some burnt sienna. I have softened up all of my colors before I started, by the way. I dropped some water in all my wells. So now my paint's really soft and gooey, and I can get a really creamy color or rich color if that's what I'm after, but I can activate my color very easily, which is what I want. Am I using an HB pencil? I believe this is just, yes, an HB. Number 2, HB. Correct. And it's just, I don't know. I don't even know where I got this pencil. Some school, I think. No particular kind. Any HB will be fine. So now to get this taupey color, how am I going to get that? It's kind of a weird... it's a weird color to mix, right? So it can be a little confusing when you're trying to mix something really light and really kind of gray, but not really cold gray. You want a warm gray, but not brown gray. You know, you're looking for something a little bit taupe. So taupe to me seems a little bit on the purple side. So why don't I mix purple? I will take some cobalt blue, some permanent rose, and I'm going to make a purple. There's my purple on my palette. It's looks a little more blue on the screen, but it's a middle of the road purple. All right, so what if I take my gray? I'm going to use a neutral tint, which is a little bit of a purple gray to start with. I'm going to take a little bit of that. Now these colors are obviously way too dark, way too dark. So I'm going to introduce a lot of water. I'm going to mix the two together a little bit. In the middle. I think I could use a little more permanent rose. All right, so let's take some of this. So I will need a darker color, but I'm going to take some of this and pull it over here. Then I'm going to add lots of water. It's still way too purple. I have to add more neutral tint. Mostly lots and lots of water. I can't really test on there. Let's see if I have a scrap somewhere. Okay, so it's still too blue, and I need to have it a lot more sort of pale pink. So I'm going to add more of my permanent rose. What if your purple's too bright, right? It's so easy to make a really, really bright purple. What would you add to it? Give me your guess. What would you add to purple to dull it down a little bit? ultramarine to burnt sienna also make a nice gray? Yes, it does, but it wouldn't look taupe. But yes, it's a good option for creating a gray. So really watered down. Let's see. I think I'm getting closer. It's still a little too purple though. So, no matter how much I water it down or how much I added of this, it's still a little too lively purple, if you know what I mean by a little bit more. Yes, you're all saying yellow, perfect. That is correct. Now, if I add a bright yellow to it, that will dull it down. So I could grab a yellow. Sometimes I will just, if I'm trying to keep it really muted colors or something like that, I'm going to go with a, pardon me, a muted yellow. How about a raw sienna? It's in the yellow family, right? It'll work. Pardon me. So if I add a little raw sienna, bingo. That's a good match. One thing you notice when I'm testing a color, I don't do it over here in the middle of the page because I can't really see it side by side. I put it right at the edge of my paper, and then I can tell whether or not I've got a good match for value and for color. So my color mixing wasn't off too much. It just was too vivid. So I had too much of the like the purple was too intense. So learn to mute your colors when your reference calls for it. So to keep things softer looking. So even in my dark area, I'm going to mute that down with a bit of that raw sienna. Okay, and over here, let's just really water this down. Okay, so I've got my paints ready. They're nice and wet and so on. I'm going to wet my paper now. So wetting my paper means background as well. And I want my background wet as well because I don't want my dog looking like it's been cut out and pasted on this background. So if it blends into the background a little bit, that's perfectly fine. You actually want that fuzzy edge look. Now I'm spreading the water around. First of all, it makes sure I don't miss any spots, but mostly because as it absorbs all that water, the paper's going to do this, normal. But where it gets low in the paper, it's all going to gather there, and I don't want I don't want wet valleys and dry peaks. So I'm spreading it around so it stays even. And let's just sort of test the waters here. Splashed all over the place here. Let's just test the waters here. I'm going to blot my brush, take a little paint off my brush, and just sort of see, okay, so if I blot my brush, that's giving me something really soft. But one thing you might notice if I zoom in, you'll notice that every time I make a stroke, I get a little pom-pom on the end of it, right? How do you work wet and wet without getting that? The secret is don't overload your brush. That means that you're going to have to probably load your brush and blot a lot, but that will prevent that problem. Or you can come into your strokes this way. Normally you would go, root to tip, but you could go the other way. The secret mainly is just don't pick up an overload of paint. You might think I'm painting the feathers, the fur, but the hairs of the fur, but I'm not. I'm actually painting the shadows. I'm leaving a lot of the white paper as my highlight area. Now in this forehead area, let me just pull Teddy back here. Remember what I said about the forehead area? In here, we're not going to have long strokes because we're looking straight into the fur. The fur is following the contour of that head, so therefore it is going to be a little bit more short or stippled type lines. I am using 11 by 15 arch 140 pound cold press paper. This one is natural white. I ran out of my bright white, so I'm using natural white, and I like both. You know, a lot depends on what I'm painting. If I'm really doing something pure, like that I need sparkling white or cool colors, like, I don't know. But if I needed something where I really wanted bright white, I would use the bright white paper. Okay, so this does not look like anything just yet. Notice the blot I'm doing. I am blotting the side of my brush because that's where all that extra moisture is trapped. This is just a, what is this? It's a number 8 synthetic brush. It's just a nylon brush. Nothing special. I didn't use special pencils. I didn't use special brushes for this. But I'm constantly looking at my reference to find out where the direction of the fur is, you know, which direction it's going in. It goes this way on this side, and it goes the other way on the other side, not straight up, as you might think. So I am always following the direction of the fur. And what I'm painting is not individual hairs. I am painting directional shadows. Like the shadows are tucked in between the hairs. So I'm leaving the hairs, but I'm painting the shadows between sections. And I always think of hair, whether it's a person or whether it's an animal or anything, I think of them as groupings. Okay, so a grouping of hair, not an individual hair. All right, so let's start getting the short hairs on the nose here. Still a little too wet. I'm getting too many pom-poms. They mostly dissolve, but you don't really want to have the dark at the end of the hairs. There are too many shadows at the end. So these ones here on the nose, they're very small, very short hairs. I'm going to start going into some of my burnt sienna now in this area around the eye. Everything I do, everything is following the contours of the fur direction. I'm never going to go just, you know, make that shape. I'm always going to be thinking fur. You know, when you pat a dog, you pat it in the direction of the fur. If you pat it against the fur, it's rough, right? It doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right, doesn't look right. The hair all stands up. It's very strange. So I am working into these. I am not really at this point concerned about getting things like individual hair, you know, individual tufts and things like that. I'm placing general color. Sort of this is like my practice run. Okay, I'm doing it very lightly, and I'm just getting a chance to try it out. Might as well paint in a little bit of that brown for the eye, but I have to work around any highlights. You know, there's a little white highlight there. I might have to lift that one out. Just make sure that spot stays kind of light. Right there. I'll come back to that. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that, oops, sorry, we're zooming in and out of focus here. The hairs, the lighter hairs in front, I have to negative paint around those. Negative paint. So as I'm painting this hair up here, this area, I have to occasionally bring a stroke down so that I can create the shape of these hairs in front. But I'm doing this while it's wet so that I don't get hard hairs. You know what I mean by, like, they don't just look stiff. So a lot of animals, it feels a little out of control because you are working on wet paper, which doesn't give you as much control, but that's what's going to give you the best look. So it's something that you want to practice. This is where I see a lot of animals, when people are painting animals, it looks rigid, it looks forced, all those shapes. So if things start to dry, you can take a spray bottle and keep things softened. Grab one out of my bag here. Light mist. I don't have to soak the paper. I just need to keep it moving. Angela says, thank you so much, Shelley. I've Googled so many times but didn't know what to call it. So I typed in, why do I get a bulbous end on my water? So that's in reference to that pom-pom effect that you get on the end of each stroke. I don't know if it's called a pom-pom. And to me, it looks like a pom-pom, so that's what I call it. But yeah, I don't see a lot of artists talking about that, but that's all to do with water control. All right, let's continue on here. It's a little warmer over here, so I've got gray in my brush. I'm gonna use more of that. A little too wet. Real change in direction. Everything almost radiates from the nostril, like from the nose area. So this is all going to come down here, and I can even go into some of my darker color in here, and I'm going to block in this. Ooh, that's too blue, isn't it? Here, I'll put a little burnt sienna in it. When working on wet paper, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Everything is going to dry extra light. Extra light. And that's because of the extra water that is on the paper is diluting the color even further than it normally does. Now I have options. If I had chosen to, I could have masked out a few of those little mustache whiskers, but I've decided that if I need those whiskers, I might use a little bit of white paint. That's more a time saver here than anything else, but I could scrape them out. You know, when the paint gets kind of sticky, tacky kind of thing, I could mask them, or I could scrape them out with my palette knife or something like that. I keep looking at my reference to see that I am following the correct contours of the fur. Now how about these darks? These darks in here are pretty important. I'm going into my heavier color, of course, at this point. Right through the eye. And for me, this is just the dry run that's going to establish whether or not this is really going to look like all the structures are right. You get the structures wrong, you won't have a good resemblance to the dog. So that is more important than getting the eye right or the, you know, every little hair in place sort of thing. That's far more important, the main structures. Because, you know, if you've got one eye higher than the other, you could draw them beautifully, but it's not going to really help. So we continue on. I'm going to take a little of my burnt sienna, just mix it into my purple here. Before I used raw sienna on the highlights, but here in the shadows, I'm using a bit of burnt sienna into my shadows, and that's also dulling this down just nicely. This area is starting to feel a little bit drier. I'll give it a very light mist so I can keep going. Looking for the little wispy hairs that come out from that ear. And this area back here is fairly soft as well because it's out of focus. Actually, the camera got it out of focus, but I made a hard line there. So I'm spraying this, just a couple of squirts with my spray bottle to soften this up. Direction of the fur, Shelley. Follow that. May not, it might all blend together anyway, but just in case it doesn't, you want to make sure that you have your lines in the correct direction. All right, let's put a little bit of I'm going to put a little bit more raw sienna in here, or burnt sienna. Sorry, I'm off screen. Let me zoom out a bit. Sorry about that. Okay. So I spritzed this area. I added a little bit more of, a little bit lighter color in there. Kind of wet everywhere now. But I'm just putting a little bit of the burnt sienna in here just to suggest that warmer color on her back. Okay. Here, I really don't want a lot of detail. So that's probably all I'm going to do there. I'm going to start building up a few areas. So in here, for example, but if I'm coming back to build up an area, one thing Absolutely. One thing you must remember, you can't go in with really wet color now. You have to, once you've got color on there and you're coming back to it, you've got to do one of two things. You either go in with drier color or you dry what you've got, wet it, and then continue. The reason is if I go into this now with really wet color in my brush, I will start to make a blossom. I don't have a glossy shine anymore. I have a shine, but can you see it's like a sheen as opposed to a shine? It's got a sheen, and that's going to make the difference. So as I'm working here, I'm going into my puddle, but I really have to make sure my brush is not wet. So I can come into here and not create blossoms as long as my brush isn't wetter than the surface. As long as my brush isn't wetter than the surface. So my brush needs to be drier than the paper. I'm going to pick up a little bit more neutral tint here, just because this is a crevice, right? A darker gap in the fur. You can spritz to keep things activated for a while. At any point when the shine is gone and you spritz, you're going to have little speckles everywhere that your little droplets hit the paper. So as long as it's still wet enough, you can spritz. But know that there is a tolerance that you will surpass if you wait until the paper gets past a certain dry stage. So in here, for example, I want to put a little bit more of this lighter color in here, this lighter shadow in through here. And as I do this, I have to start thinking about the shapes now of the various curls and things like that. Cindy says, I'm astonished at how long your paper stayed wet before you had to spray it. Mine dries ridiculously fast. Would you ever recommend adding a medium to extend the drying time? No, I would not recommend a medium. I would recommend that you really soak the paper. When it's soaked through right through to the back of the paper, in other words, if this is the thickness of your paper, magnified by 1,000, right? When you first put paint in or first put water in, it might seep down to here, and then the top is dry and the bottom is dry. If you put one thin layer of water on, if you fill it up from top to bottom, it's amazing how long that paint will sit on top before it begins to give you, the surface starts to dry out. Because it's now wet all the way through. And I put a load of water on here. Yeah, it does make your paper wrinkle more. And it's just something that you get used to in watercolor. So you can see as the paper gets drier, I'm seeing more crisp lines. I don't want too many of those. A few are fine, but I don't want too many. So I'm coming into some of these areas here, and I'm creating the lighter curls by not painting them, by painting around them. All right, so let's see. The curls change direction, so does my brush. Okay, main shadows will definitely create correct shapes for your drawing or for your painting. Now over here, my paper's still very, I don't know if you can see it. You can see that it's raised up, right? It's still quite wet. Look at me bouncing this around. You know, you can see that the paper, it almost feels almost dry, but it is still holding lots of that water. So if I need to work into an area and I really don't want to have to dry it again. And I can't push because I'll start to get ugly marks and blossoms and nasty stuff. So one way that I've learned to get around this, and I guess this came from teaching a lot and sort of needing to press through while I had a group of people around me, is that if I took a flat brush, this isn't a special flat brush, it's a flat synthetic hair brush, and I'm going to blot it and dampen an area that I want to work in. Okay, only damp. Go beyond the shape, okay? Because if you stop at the shape, again, you're going to go right back to that, you know, hard edge that you don't want. So let's come back to my very light fur. Definitely more warm, so I'm going to use a little bit more of the burnt sienna here for this. Blot my brush. It's got to be drier than the paper for control. And let's try some of this. Okay, so I'm still getting the soft edges. It's not running out of control. I'm not getting the pom-poms. Ooh, that was actually a pretty good solution. So I'm going to do a little bit more of this. Ooh, I hit a dry patch. So that part didn't get wet, so I just brush it with this damp, still damp, flat brush. This is a good solution for you impatient people. You know who you are. Actually, I am too. I am very impatient when it comes to waiting for paint to dry. And that is one thing that really can mess you up, as you know, if you're trying to learn watercolor, that waiting for things to dry, it's boring. There's no question. It is just a boring, mundane. Nobody wants to watch paint dry. So I'm going to, oops, that's too dry. Look at that. I made a really strong mark. So just gently swipe it with the damp brush. I don't think that there's any way I can explain to you exactly how damp this brush is, but if I get it clean, it's full right now, blot it on good absorbent paper towel. In my classes, sometimes they have those brown towels on a roll in, you know, studios and stuff, and it's not good for this because it's not very absorbent. So this is a nice absorbent paper towel, and I guess in some countries they call it kitchen towel. But now this like it's a damp brush. It's only damp. If I brush over this, I can soften as I go and have a surprising amount of control. I'm always looking, is this changing color? Yeah, it's changing color from, as it starts to go into shadows, this does start to change color. Now I'm almost at the point here where I could have a few crisper lines, but I want to get all the soft ones first. Establish the general value, then you can start coming in and getting a couple of those crisper lines. Let's It's a little bit too brown. Let's keep this going. And I'm thinking all the time about this area while I'm painting the shadow, because I have to paint around that stuff, which requires a lot of observation. It really is something that you just will have to teach yourself as you go, because you will learn what doesn't work for you. Yeah, Lynn's saying that someone said once that keep toilet paper near on a roll to blot. Yes, and I've seen some people take like even a towel, like a tea towel or something like that, and wrap it around the a roll of toilet paper, and because it's of course very absorbent, but it will break down pretty easy because it's toilet paper. So you need to cover it in something, either a really good brand of paper towel or a tea towel or something along those lines, and it will keep absorbing for a very long time. Then you can take the towel off, wash it, continue using it, the same roll for ages. And I've seen many people use that technique actually. So you see, as I do this, I am leaving gaps. The gaps indicate the tufts, not the dark areas. The dark areas are still shadow. They're still shadow. That's not the. I'm not painting hairs. I don't know how. I don't know if I can emphasize that enough, but yeah, that's definitely not individual hairs that I am painting. I'm painting gaps between the hairs, or the tufts of hair. So I'm going to continue on building and building and building until I am satisfied that I have a soft, established, the fur in the right direction, all of that good stuff. See a line that you don't like? Just, you've got your damp brush handy. Just give it a little gentle, and I'm barely touching the paper when I do this. It's just, I'm not trying to wipe it away. I'm not trying to erase it. I'm just trying to soften it. So just a dampened brush is a great way to manage that. I think I'm almost at the point where I have to stop and dry this. So I'm going to do that. I can spray it for so long, but I know there's some areas that are getting much too dry. And I want to work, and I want to continue with the softness. So I'm going to do probably 3-4 layers of this wet on wet technique. So you want to make sure you're using a paper that has durability. I'm finding that some of the papers that I've tried recently, even if they're 100% cotton, they just don't have the durability. The fibers seem a little softer, and they don't stand up to multiple re-wettings of your paper. It's one of the reasons I do like the Arche paper. So this would obviously take me a while to paint. I'm going to be at this for some time. I'm going to complete more of an area. It's not how I would typically work, but just for time's sake, I want to complete an area so that you can get a feeling for how the process works from start to finish. I'll know when my paper is dry when it feels flat again and no longer damp to the touch. I think I'm going to work more in this area here on the shadow. I'll have to work a little bit on the right, on the sun side as well, but all right, let's take this now, let it cool down to room temperature because I don't want to wet it when it's really hot. That's just like, when a car's, you throw water on a hot car, it's just going to fizzle and evaporate. Brazen Hearted saying that they've seen some artists wet the back of their paper first before beginning a painting and are using a fine mist spray bottle to keep it wet for longer. Test it on paper scraps first. Good advice is regarding the testing on paper. I will. I stretch my paper, so that means I soak it for 3 minutes and I staple it down while it's wet. You can't tape that when you are. You can't tape it while it's wet because the tape doesn't stick. There are types of tape that you can use. It is called, like, it's like a craft paper tape that's gummed on one side, and that's a watercolor tape. I have used it. Some people love it. I don't. I find that, it's a little unreliable. If you soak it multiple times, it's usually starts to lift. But that's my own experience. Some people absolutely love it. So if you're more of a quick, immediate painter, that might be just the ticket for you. But for this particular technique, I sure wouldn't. I wouldn't suggest that one. Will I finish this demo next week? I don't know. Well, will I? How about you guys vote whether or not I'm going to finish this next week or not? I could give you a taste and leave you with that. It's more of the same. If you want sort of more reinforcement about it, it is more of the same. But I will, but I could if you want me to. So you just let me know what you would like me to do. Just put it in the chat. And if you would like me to continue this one into next week and get it a little more complete, then fine. I will be happy to do that. Just let me know. Okay. Pardon me, I've got the grumbles. All right, now that I've got this dried, and one thing about drying this, by the way, is that it will more or less set what you've got underneath. It will also soften. It'll soften what you've got underneath, but I'm going to wet this again. I'm going to bring my water over. I want you to see how wet I'm making it. I've got a very large brush. I'm scooping lots of water on. I would rather put too much water on and then wait for it to soak in than to not put a lot of water on and have that evaporate too soon. So the idea here is I am filling up the paper. So you can see I've scooped into my water with as much as I can get in my brush, and I've put it on several times, just like I did the first time. I will have to be a little gentle with the brushing back and forth, though, because I don't want to move what I've got. Okay. This is a great question. Do I ever have more than one painting going at once to avoid working too fast on one. Yes, I think that that's a really great practice to do. Now, I might I might not work on two this size. I might have like a small painting that I'm working on the side, but I would do something similar for both paintings so that I'm reinforcing my technique and learning it. I'm not sort of forgetting. And plus you'd have to have a separate palette if you were using a completely different painting. I want to use the colors that I have already mixed, or have a separate palette for your other painting. But yeah, that's a good habit to get into, because you are not pushing to your impatience isn't going to get the better of you, basically. All right, so it seems that the general consensus is to continue next week. So I will do that, but I'm going to continue for a few more minutes here. I'd like to get the softness of the fur a little more established, and I wanted to show layer 2 at least. At some point, I'm also going to be considering my background wet on wet as well. And the idea behind that is that the edges of the dog aren't going to be crisp. I could do it another way. Maybe I'll talk about that. Maybe I'll talk about that one next week. Let's just focus on the dog today. So, more of the individual hairs. My brush is creating pom-poms, so I have to blot it a little bit more, which means I'm getting less on my paper, but I am not getting those little pom-poms. That's when the brush is as wet as the paper, and then you lift, and it always leaves that little deposit at the end. Okay, so I'm going to continue keeping the hairs really soft. Be very mindful not to fill in all the hair. You need to keep some of the white paper in this case to show the highlights. When I'm looking at my photo, let me point what I'm looking at without getting this wet. Okay, so I'm looking at this gap. Let me zoom in, trying not to get it wet. I'm going to zoom in on this, and I'm going to point at what I'm painting. Okay, so I'm painting this dark area right in here. I'm painting these dark areas in here. This one in here. That's what I'm painting, not the hairs themselves. As many times as I say that in a class, there's still people that forget. And so I'm going to keep repeating it until your understanding is thorough. All right, so I'm not going to get too bogged down with preciseness. You can get the general effect without doing every little thing that you're seeing with your eyes. You can get the general idea. But I am blotting my brush every time. And even though you look at this dog and you think, oh, that's a white dog, there's a surprising amount of color in white animals. White anything for that matter. If I'm painting like a white teacup, you'd be shocked how much color is actually in that shadow area. It's going to pick up a lot of the surrounding color. color from the skin, you know, like even the under skin below the hairs, you know, it's going to pick up a little of that color at the same time. A couple of spots might be a little darker. I used to do quite a few pet portraits. I actually did them in acrylic, not so much watercolor. But I have done a number of pet portraits in watercolor. If I think to do it, I'll try and remember to pull a couple out to show you next week as I continue this. You do end up with a lot of wet paper towel by the end of these wet on wet techniques. This dog is not a small dog. I mean, she's small-ish. She's more middle-sized. Very sweet. And I thought I just loved this photo because it just kind of was her personality. All right. I think in this eye area, I'd like to get a little bit more color. So I'm just going to put a little more brown, burnt sienna with a bit of color mixed in there. The other color mixed in. I can get this a little darker. Just leaving that highlight. I have to leave it bigger than I want because it's wet paper and it's going to fill in. I just want to get a little bit of that eye started here. Same on the other side. And may not look like like they don't look like they match, and that's because this one's in shadow. Thanks, Jen. Hi, Millie. Millie is my granddaughter, and Jen is my daughter, who is also a wonderful artist, very different from me, and you should check out her YouTube. Jen Pryor. Jen, can you put your handle in the chat? This pup is not my dog. This is my sister-in-law's dog, and her name is Maggie. So but Jen Pryor art, is it? What is it, Jen? Put it in there. Don't be shy. Jen Pryor art. Her style is very different than mine, but you will love her color sense. So I'm just lightening up. I'm lifting out a little color here just to get that a little bit lighter. I'm going to come in with something dark, maybe some of that neutral tint here, just along this outer edge. Now this, in order for me to get this sort of color on here and have it not run out of control, it means my paper's getting to the damp stage, not the wet stage, but the damp stage. And it is, my brush is very dry as well as I do this. One thing I love about dogs is they have these beautiful dewy eyes. Uh, she is part, my sister-in-law told me, and I can't remember now. I'll find out before next week. But she is part poodle, standard poodle, I guess, because she's fairly, you know, she's bigger than, she's not like a lap dog. She's pretty big. And but she's not as big as, say, a big German Shepherd. She's kind of in between. Nice middle size. So I can only get control like this, and it's giving me these softened edges. I can only get this with much drier paint in my brush and when the paper isn't really, really wet. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask my sister-in-law. I don't think that's it, but I could be wrong. Yeah. You know what? I'm going to put a link to Jen Pryor's art underneath this video at the end of this video so that you can check her out. I don't know, but she's a lovely dog anyway. Blotting my brush, so important. And you can see this is still running. It's, you know, it's not giving me totally crisp, but that gives me that lovely dewy-eyed effect. I have more work to do on this for sure. I probably spend most of my time doing just this wet on wet stuff, but I want to get a little bit more established. This isn't looking quite right to me yet, so I'm going to build up a little more in here. Is it still wet enough? I don't know. But these are actually going to be fairly crisp areas anyway, so I think I'm okay. As you work, don't put a stroke down and go, oh, it's too dry, and keep going anyway. I mean, just either take your damp brush and soften it, or dry everything and re-wet it. But you want to make sure that you aren't pushing your luck. I have every confidence that my little granddaughter, Millie, is going to be an artist too. Well, the day she was born, I had my daughter put a paintbrush in her hand and take a photo. So hopefully we're going to spend a lot of time painting together. That would be, I would love that. I spend some of my, occasionally on my weekends, I will spend time, we'll get together, we paint together, the whole family actually, or my girls anyway, and the one doesn't paint so much, she's more of a crafter, but we get together and we have a lot of fun. So I'm painting, this is getting a little drier. You can see the edges of my brush strokes are getting a little crisper. And I'm just taking my time. I actually love this process. I could spend I could happily spend my time doing this. Now, this isn't everybody's cup of tea because not everybody has patience to work this slowly. But you can get so much softness by working this way. Yeah, and Angela says she's seen my daughter's whimsical animals and they are fabulous. Add your details, Jen. Yes, Jen, where'd you go? She's probably busy with that baby. So they do keep you busy. She's a busy lady with a 2.5-year-old. But she's going gangbusters with her art, which is lovely to see. I'm going to try spraying this. I don't want to get that eye smeared, so I'm going to block it. A little spritz, see if I can paint back into this. So you can see that where I leave the gaps, those look like the areas that are in the light, the ends of the hair. So, all right. So my daughter says they're here. They made popcorn for my movie. Okay. I think I'd like to get a little hint of that mouth in this as well. The reason I'm suggesting some of the facial features at this point is because I want to make sure that those don't get lost in all of the shadows and things that I'm adding on. So I want to make sure I'm getting some of that established. I'm going to block in the nose bit as well. So I added a little more permanent rose to this mixture here. It's got a little of every color in it, but I've got a more permanent rose in here, and I want to get this pinkish shape in here. Come in with drier color and neutral tint. Don't want to get into neutral or into detail mode yet. I'm still keeping this fairly basic shape concept at this point. Not getting distracted by detail. Easier said than done. Okay, so hiding down in here, and I will use a little white paint for some of these whiskers. I did tell you at the beginning that I wanted to make sure that this kept rolling along, so I'm opting to put white paint on my painting as opposed to putting the masking fluid on. If you want to paint along after this and you want to paint and get those little whiskers on, you could use something like this and apply masking fluid in all of those little whiter lip hairs, like these little ones here. Right? You could actually put those on first. Yes, whiter animals are more challenging for sure. So I can try and paint in between some of it. negative painting, in other words. And again, I have to always be looking, what is the direction of those hairs? I need to paint the little spaces in between. But then we have this mouth here. You'll notice I'm flicking up into the hairs, which might seem like a weird thing to do, but it's going to remind me what I have to do here and help me visualize it a little bit better too. It's not finished. That's not by a long shot is that finished, but let's get the nostrils in here. Those dark alien eyes. You arrived late. I said that a dog's nose often reminds me of an alien head with a big bulbous skull and then eyes and then a little tiny chin. There we go. All right, so at least I have a placement now for the mouth and everything. So I'm going to come back to some of the lighter stuff. Things are still wet down here. I'm still working on wet paper, but I want to establish some of the fur on the chin. It's squished a little bit by the armchair. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Yeah, actually, Michael, my daughter's Jen's work is actually mostly acrylic that she is working in. She does do multiple media. She's very accomplished in watercolor as well. She's drawing skills are fantastic, but she's working very. I don't know how I would describe the style of nature fantasy kind of thing. It is not really not realistic like mine. I'm a high realist, but she's got this design element from her days in college where she was taking graphic design. And so everything's a little more stylized in what she does and very, very beautiful colors and patterns. So I think you will enjoy seeing her work. I'm going to do a little bit more here. Then I'll probably wrap this one up, but I'll work as long as I can while this is still wet and get this sorted out. I do find that painting fur does take a long time. It's probably longer than doing a person's face, which is smooth, right? Because you have all these textures that you have to build up in multiple layers. Yeah, gradients are fantastic. I actually love gradients in my watercolor as well. For those of you who might not know, gradients are when it fades very gently from a light to a dark or one color to another. Transitions, basically. Okay, mucking around here. I'm not getting my soft edges. So let's take my damp brush. Take care of that. Now I don't have a blossom happening. Just that little bit of a tickle with my other brush is going to give me that softening that I need. So, I'm not really thinking too much about fur. I'm thinking about that shape that I'm painting. How dark is it? And what shape is it? Is it in the right place? Well, hopefully it's in the right place because I drew it well. But that's what's going on in my head. Not, oh, that doesn't look like hair. That doesn't look like an eye. That doesn't look like an ear, whatever the case may be. I'm not thinking in those terms. I'm thinking about things like, is that shadow dark enough? Is it the right value? That kind of thing. Anyway, so I think, see how this feels a little bit flat? I will develop a little bit of dimension on this by changing values within that space. So as I work through here, I think it's still damp enough. I can do a little bit here. But as I work through here, I can build up a little bit more shadow here, and then perhaps close to the nose. Then you'll get the feeling of like a ribbon. Okay, so a ribbon, when you bend a ribbon, it has a really dark shadow, and then it comes up to a very shiny highlight, and then it goes down to a shadow. Well, this isn't going to be as shiny as that, but you're still going to get the feeling that it's rounded. That's what that difference in value is going to give you. So that's very important to do. It always gets a little tricky when the hair's crisscross. You just have to look at the weird little shapes in between. You can try a little scraping out as well. I don't do a lot of scraping out in my painting, especially if I'm planning to do a lot of layers. When you scrape, you actually score the paper. When you score it and you re-wet it and put paint on it, all the paint will gather in that spot that you scored. It will be dark, so know that. Let's see how damp it is up here. Ooh, not very. It's pretty dry up in here, so I'll maybe just hint at a little bit here. But what I find on this side, you see the little tufts of hair that come out? That means the shadows come in from the other side. So to get that effect, I have to come from the other direction. But every time I'm building on these surfaces, you'll notice I'm not really jumping a lot of values. So if you're all familiar with a value scale, it goes from 1 to 9 in most cases. Sometimes it's more, but a value scale means that I'm not going to go from, say, a 3 value all the way up to a 7 value. It'll just look way too stark, and I'm building up in small increments in order to get the effect that I want. Smaller increments so that I don't make my errors, right? And I do find that this could actually come in a little bit, so I'm going to bring this up a little more. I wanted to darken in there because it felt like this was out too far a little bit. It might be all right. Looks not too bad, but just a little bit there. Oh, I got my reference wet. I knew that was going to happen eventually. When you print on a inkjet, the ink will run. All right, so some areas are feeling dry while some areas are feeling wet, and that's because it's a peak or a valley. And so there's a little inconsistency there as to how wet things are. That's when the damp brush can come in. So I could take some of the moisture over here and wipe it over here. Now I can paint into this and it won't run all over the place, or it won't be dry. Be nice and soft and gentle. Sometimes you want a couple of hard lines. We'll get to some of those. I don't have to worry about too much of that right now. But there we go. We're starting to create where the shadows are going to be, and I may work a little bit more on this just because, you know, I could spend like weeks actually working on it. I might build this up a little bit more before next week, but it'll be just sort of more the same. But I will make sure that you get to see the finished result. So we'll just keep moving along. Oh, I lost my little highlight there. And those little zigzags that I'm doing at the bottom of the eye are for, of course, the fur here coming up in front. There's so many people who are newer to watercolor that kind of forget about that and then go, oh, I guess I should have left that. Do I have any exercises to practice patience? Not really, other than as suggested earlier, pick up another painting and work on that while you're waiting for this one to dry. Think too about your production. I wouldn't call myself a fast painter. I can be fast if I need to be, but if I'm left to my own devices, I just spend all the time in the world just working on something because I get lost in the process. Regardless of the finished result, I just, this is mesmerizing for me. And I feel relaxed. Think about the process, not the end result. Yeah, I know we're all eager to get there, but sometimes the journey is the best part. When you're think of how you feel after you've finished a painting, it's kind of like, well, that one's done. And it's such a momentary thing, that gratification when it's done, but you could feel gratification all the way through if you need to. Just kind of slow down your thinking, and learn. You have to work at the pace of the watercolor. Let's put it that way. You have to work at the pace of the watercolor rather than the other way around, if you are trying to create realism. So there's lots of wonderful painting that's very fast, spontaneous, splashing color, not fussing with details, that sort of thing, and you get very fresh looking paintings out of that. But that's just not my. It's just not me. So it's wonderful, but it's not my style. All right, I'm going to wrap this one up for today, and we will continue Maggie next week in Wednesday morning. So just going to check on my comments here. Connor's asking, hello, by the way, do I know if this is taken in the morning? This was actually, well, we were at a cottage at the time, and it was, I believe, later in the day, and the sun was low. So that's why we have all these really nice warm tones coming through the window on Maggie here. You will find a big difference between the lighting in the morning or the evening versus the middle of the day. Middle of the day, you're probably going to get a lot more blue in your shadows. At the end of the day, you're going to get a lot more warmth in your shadows. So it can make a big difference. Jen's got a good suggestion. Jen listens to audiobooks free with Shopify, or Artist Talks to help me be patient while I paint. One of my favorite channels to listen to especially is Hornby Arts on YouTube. Okay, thanks, Jen, for that. That's in reference to the being patient. All right, that's good. We will see you next week to finish this one up. Thank you so much, and we'll see you later. Bye.